Thank you so much for joining us this morning. As we do every week, we talk with Edwin Eisendrath, who is the former CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times and a radio host in Chicago on Heartland Signal. And you can pick that up anywhere because it's online. You don't have to be from Chicago. And every week we talk about what's going on with the latest headlines, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So thanks so much for being here again.
Thank you.
So I guess probably a good place to start is the Supreme Court, which got a lot of attention a few weeks ago with its, decisions before the summer. But a lot of what this court, this very conservative court, has been doing has been making policy before any oral arguments are even heard on what's called the shadow docket and giving Trump some huge wins. I'm sure that President Joe Biden would have really liked this approach to executive power, like on student loans and many of the initiatives he tried to make. But the latest decision that came out, which was an unsigned opinion, basically gives Trump carte blanche to dismantle the Department of Education, which has been one of those talking points on the right that I think a lot of people never really took seriously. But now we're going to have 1,400 people laid off. And more than that, it has such a huge impact on every state in the country because our educational system is dependent on all of this federal funding and to a large degree on policy that they're making. So um, this is such a consequential decision, and there have been so many by this court. Um, let's start there, Edwin. What do you think
Yeah,
of all this?
there are two. I want to do this in two parts. There's the shadow docket and what it means, and I think we need to spend some time on that. But
Mhm.
specifically in the weeds on the Department of Education, it's really clear what it means. It means funding for low-income students in America is going to dry up. That's Title One, and the people who administer it gone. It means support for girls in sports, Title IX, gone. It means
And
sports.
supposedly, support for girls in sports was a huge priority for the Trump
They're
administration. That's
lying
why
about
they
everything.
right, but
It
they were
doesn't
going
matter what they
after
said, they're lying.
yeah, it was
Um,
it was their anti-transgender agenda, and women were never really part of, the priority.
no, they were not. Support for kids with learning differences, gone. Student loans for college, they'll take forever to process them. They're basically gone. Civil rights, um, uh, they enforce it. Those laws about schools all over the country, gone. Um, and then you know what? This department was where the data on what works and what doesn't work was gathered and analyzed. So just knowledge that we need in order to continue to improve schools in America, gone. Right?
Right.
Turned back to states who are in many cases determined to get rid of public education entirely, to privatize education in their states, often giving tax dollars to churches to run schools
Mhm.
or to uh, uh,
Private
felons
corporations.
to run schools, as we saw in Ohio. It's it's opening the door to yet another huge set of corruption scandals, and none of it is in the interest of America's children or America's uh, college-age kids or even of having an educated country. It's a terrible, terrible decision.
Yeah.
But then the way they made it is worth talking about too, because boy, are you right about their use of the shadow docket. I mean, well, let's just remember that it was not that long ago. I mean, ancient history, right? 2021, Joe Biden was president, and the Supreme Court legitimized this crackpot right wing theory called the major questions doctrine, which
Right.
had never been a thing. And that doctrine, they said, was, oh, well, the executive branch can't make major decisions for America. Congress has to do that. So you cannot have a regulator decide that the Clean Air Act has anything to do with climate change because that would be a major question. Climate change wasn't an issue when they passed the
Right.
Clean Air Act. So if a
And
kid,
basically the idea is that, Congress would have to legislate on a micro level,
correct,
which it's never had to do that.
and doesn't
Why?
want to do.
Right,
right?
and
So
I
they're
mean, as
imposing on Congress. I mean, Congress was funding experts in the departments to do this work. So
mhm,
Congress's intent was clear, but the court decided, well, they don't have that power. And so the administration of Joe Biden doesn't have that power. But Donald Trump, he has the power to settle major questions like who's a citizen of the United States, or
right,
are you entitled to the constitutional protections of due process? And he's allowed to do that. And why is
right,
he allowed to do that? Though the court, because it's dishonest and cynical, did not give us, did not say he's actually allowed to do it. What they said was, well, it takes time for the judiciary to decide whether something he's done is legal or not. And while the courts are going through that, we will take it upon ourselves without any reason to say what he can do in the interim. He can
mhm,
break any of those laws before somebody tells him they're illegal. And that, and it, I mean, between May 1st and June 23rd in America, lower courts decided against Donald Trump 94% of the time.
right,
94%, right? The Supreme Court, nope, wrong. We're going to just set all those judgments aside and let those things that the courts have said are illegal happen until final decisions are made way down the road. So
right,
this thing on the Department of Education, they didn't say Donald Trump is legally entitled to close the Department of Education. They said, well, that question is wending its way through the courts.
mhm,
And while it's wending its way through the courts, we are going to intervene and say he can do it while we wait for a final decision, in which
right,
case it doesn't matter. It de facto will matter.
right. And so, he basically gets to break things and ask questions later. Anything he wants to do, he's basically been given carte blanche on by a court that now, seems very comfortable being known as a highly partisan institution, which, for years, that was a perception that Chief Justice John Roberts, really chafed against. Um, and now in Trump's second term, all bets are off. This court has shown time and time again that they are not going to stand up to Trump. They like executive power, at least for one party. And lower courts, which, we should note, this is not just, all Obama or Biden or Clinton judges, lots of Bush judges, some from, Trump one, were ruling against the Trump administration because of the legally, questionable nature of all of these actions. But this Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has a very different, view on what Trump can and can't do. I do want to just go back to the issue with education itself
Mhm.
because um, it's something I personally feel very strongly about. My mother actually, her first job was being a Title I teacher after she got her teaching degree when I was 10, and
Mine too, Susan.
uh,
Mine too. I taught
yeah,
in Chicago public schools,
she
after college, and starting it was Title One.
yeah. And she, that was her first job, and she was in the suburban, Chicago public school system, and her job was to help, a lot of kids whose families were immigrants or a lot of military families and, basically help make sure that they had the reading skills to survive. And it's a crucial job. And to not have that, that's kind of, in my opinion, the backbone of our education system. And really, for this country, our public education system was one of the ways that we truly became a country in the 19th century, that we had a universal nationalized system where suddenly you weren't expected to just be out in the fields at the age of 8. You were entitled, as a citizen of the United States to an education. And it was a national department that took care of that because if it were up to the states, we know that, certain states would not have valued education and there would have been a very unequal system. We do have an unequal system today. There's no doubt about it. But, this we had the envy of the world in terms of our education system, what we built. And the public college system soon followed. A lot of those land grant universities that the first one was actually in Michigan State, and Abraham Lincoln is the reason for that. And our public college system used to be the ending. Now it's extremely expensive, and we've seen budget cuts between research and everything else. That's also being dismantled too. And so, what we're seeing from USAID being, totally destroyed, the State Department laying off career civil servants all across, of course, the Environmental Protection Agency effectively does not exist. Every major facet of what has made us a civilized and um, enviable democracy is being dismantled in real time, I think quicker than anyone really expected. And the Supreme Court is a main way that this is happening so quickly, instead of Trump having to actually go through the court system. And this would have been decided in normal time years from now, as you pointed out.
The things this administration is doing are catastrophic, and everywhere you look. You can look at the response to the terrible flood in Texas. You can look at the cuts to schools. I mean, you can look at the cosplay armies. They're marching through parks and basketball courts around the country. I mean,
Right.
it is, or the fashion shows that Christy Nome puts on in front of prisoners. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
repulsive, right? But all of it is enabled by a supine Republican Congress and a dishonest and corrupt Supreme Court. And they're not better jurists than the ones who ruled against Trump all those times. They're just more political.
Right.
John Roberts is. I mean, let's just look at some of these decisions. Susan, they said Elon Musk can have all that Social Security data. What's he going to do with it? They didn't ask, right? They didn't even
Right.
bother to ask. Why are they allowing him to do it? We're not entitled to know. They said immigrants can be deported to third countries without notice or due process, and then they doubled down so that he could send people to South Sudan, a place that is perilous beyond imagination. And they
Right.
didn't say it was legal; they just said he could do it.
Yep.
Right? Like, okay, there's a law, but this is a gray zone, and this president gets to operate in it. They allowed um they allowed him to get rid of rescind the temporary protected status of immigrants from war zones. Send them back there to be killed. Who cares, right? They're using this shadow docket to do it, not signing their names to it. The cowards. Not
Hmm.
telling us the reasoning for it, which is crazy. But what they've done is they've triggered dissents from the minority on the court, which almost never happens on the shadow docket.
Right.
And I've been reading those dissents. Honestly, they are for our generation what the Declaration of Independence was, for the founders. I mean, they are they are standing, excuse me, on the principles of democracy up against this tyrant. Um, I wrote down because I thought it'd be fun to just read part of Sotomayor's dissent on the education bill
Hmm.
yesterday. She wrote, the president, pardon me for looking over at my note here, the president must take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Now, in her case, that's the law that created the Department of Education, right? Must take care that the laws are faithfully executed, not set out to dismantle them. That basic rule undergirds our Constitution's separation of powers. Yet today, the majority rewards clear defiance of that core principle with emergency relief. Because I cannot condone such abuse of our equitable authority, I respectfully dissent. So she's accusing her colleagues of abusing their authority to let the executive branch not carry out his oath of
Right.
office. Right.
I was so struck last year after I know that Sotomayor gave an interview after the court essentially, ruled that Trump had absolute immunity, and really paved the way for him to be reelected, because there was no accountability for his January 6th coup, which kind of sent the signal that, this wasn't that big of a deal to people. And I remember that she said, "There are some days where I just go into my office and cry." And I feel like if a justice on the Supreme Court feels that way, how do the rest of us? And that's what it feels like to read these decisions, because everything that we know about what makes this country great is being gutted and dismantled. And um, I think that, some days it's very difficult not to feel helpless like that, and there's no use in us pretending otherwise. I know that, right now, Trump is trying to get another very right-wing judge on the federal bench, Emil Bove. He used to be Trump's personal lawyer. Um, Interestingly enough,
He is,
uh,
excuse me, Susan, he's not a
yeah,
right-wing judge. He is a lackey who does not believe in the rule of law. He
no,
shouldn't be. He's not right-wing. He is a criminal who says we should, and by criminal I mean he says we should ignore the courts.
right.
Right? But the fact that
Mm,
he is
it
still a nominee in any other administration, in any other time, he would have been sent packing immediately once the revelations were out about the things that he has said about disobeying courts.
right, and I mean, he played an integral role in, making sure that people who prosecuted the January 6th,
Criminals.
defend criminals, were that those people were purged out of the Department of Justice. He basically thinks that probably the Supreme Court hasn't gone far enough to let Trump have absolute power, and then he relied in his testimony to the U.S. Senate on the old saw of, well, I'm just a country lawyer. This is all so new to me. I didn't know that I was doing anything wrong, which, is crap, and we all know it. But this, I think, is the kind of justice that we're going to see Trump nominate now. Before, in his first term, it was the Federalist Society, very right wing judges. Now these are lackeys and fascists who, Trump wants to nominate. And even the Federalist Society isn't necessarily on board for because Trump is feuding with them. But what I find interesting is that judges were such a priority for his first term, and part of that is that Mitch McConnell was the Senate Majority Leader, and this was pretty much his biggest priority. But Trump now doesn't need people on the lower courts because he's got he has the Supreme Court in his pocket. So, this has not been as much of a priority. His priority has been with the executive branch basically, forcing it to commit suicide so that, his loyalists are installed and government really doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I am not betting that the United States Senate will have the. I was going to say courage, but that's not even. It doesn't take courage that will care enough about the country to stop that nomination. They've proven that they will allow Donald Trump to do whatever he wants, and shameful, terrible, and dangerous to our democracy. I am not, though, like you said before. I don't feel helpless. I feel motivated and angry. But I go out and talk to people everywhere, and Americans,
Mm.
even Americans who voted for Trump, don't like some of the things they see. And we have to protect our ability to hold elections. I mean, I'm sure that all of those newly minted, ICE guys are gonna be fully armed and surrounding polling places where they think, oh, I don't know, people who look Latino might vote to
Let
scare
me
them off
guess.
in the next
Lots
election.
of
We
lots
should go
of
with them as right? We
lots of districts in Chicago and Detroit, neighborhoods that you'd exactly expect are where they will
Yeah.
be.
We need to defend our elections, and I think Americans will support us as we defend our elections and, um, and vote these people out. They're awful, and they have to I mean, there's nothing left but the sovereignty of the American people to save the democracy. The Congress of the United States has sold out, will not do it. They just passed the cruelest, most, a terrible law since the Fugitive Slave Act in the country. The Supreme Court has okayed all that stuff as they did the Fugitive Slave Act. This is where we are. And these people, they said we could change the country peacefully if the Democrats will let us. Well, we're not going to let them. And if they want to bring it on, then they're going to bring it on. But we're going to be ready for them. They do not get to take our country, Susan. They just don't get to do it.
Well, I really appreciate you talking about, being angry and motivated because that is so important. And um, frankly, on some days that's kind of the kick in the ass that I need, and maybe other people do too, because that is part of the playbook of authoritarians is to make us feel helpless, is, to make us feel like there's nothing that we can do. And so you just have to surrender. And so, yeah, let's talk about what we can do now because elections are far away unless, there are a few local elections, which are extremely important. And those are, that is how we continue to preserve our democracy because local government has a huge impact on our lives. And so obviously that's important. Virginia, New Jersey, they have their statewide elections coming up.
Yep.
But for most seats of Congress, we've got to wait well over a year. Um, what what is it? What are some concrete things that we can do right now so
Well,
that we can stand up and resist?
first, we have to make sure, and what you're doing in these shows, can we call them? I actually don't know what to call these things, right? This kind of stuff helps because people need to know, right? And there is this weird news ecosystem, but things are breaking through. People, are seeing those ICE troops march along, and they don't like it. They they have learned that the people in that county in Texas refused to take money from the Biden administration that would have prevented this terrible disaster because they said the government is the enemy and we won't trust them. Their decisions are partly responsible for that terrible tragedy, and um, we need to talk about this. We need to share this. And I don't mean we need to, I don't want to be Jerry Falwell in the AIDS crisis and say that flood is God's retribution against terrible people for not doing what they were doing. That's cruel,
Yeah,
and I don't believe that. But I do believe it's man-made decisions about climate change, about public safety, about being in this country together and using the
yeah,
resources we have to make people's lives better. So we need to talk about that. That's one thing. Just like let's keep letting people know inflation is back up. Let's make sure people know it and know who's
yeah.
to blame for it. It's those tariffs.
Right.
Absolutely. It's those that Donald Trump is raising everybody's prices while he's giving billionaires tax breaks.
Right.
We need to tell everybody every day.
Right.
Right? That's
I
now.
I remember last summer, in the run up to the 2024 election, it was nonstop coverage from the media about inflation, inflation, inflation. Today, the numbers came out, and inflation is up 2.7% over June of last year. When all we heard about was this was Biden's fault. He'll never get reelected because of it. Shortly around this time is when he actually left the race. But now, it's just kind of like, oh, inflation, huh? Wonder why that's going on. Oh, yeah, there are these tariffs. Who's doing it? It's Trump. And
Yeah.
it's up to us to talk about why this is happening. If there was anything that most people who were not, they're not like us. We're not, they don't read news all the time and talk about it and
Thank
obsess
goodness.
over it. Yeah, exactly. They're normal people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they, if there's one thing that they cared about, it was inflation. It was high prices. And that was why they were willing to take the chance and vote for Trump because at least it was some sort of change they thought, just probably not the kind of change they expected. Now prices are rising over what they were when they were so upset during the Biden administration. This is a disaster. And, unless you are one of those hardcore MAGA people, the 20-30% of this country that will be with Trump no matter what, except maybe, over Epstein, which is an interesting thing, um, you're not happy right now. Your kids are going back to school. It's hard to afford school supplies. Energy costs are going up. Healthcare costs next year are going to be atrocious. This is very serious. We're really seeing so many things that people count on coming undone. And so I feel like what you were talking about with these, shows, really, these are discussions and, the comments that people make in the chats, the relationships that people have in our community and
Mhm,
elsewhere, in other places, or, even just I'm sure you have with your readers with your newsletter on
mhm,
Substack.
mhm.
It's inspiring, and really it starts with us and us talking with people in our lives, especially those folks who aren't political junkies like us about what's going on and why and what we can do.
Yeah.
Because they want to destroy community. That is really at the heart of this because that's the only way the authoritarians can,
Right, make people feel alone.
right.
Make
And we're
no,
not.
no. So 2 points out of that. One is the absolute essential to build community and online, but also where you live. Get to know
Right.
your neighbors, right? Because when ICE shows up and says the guy 3 houses away from you is a criminal and a rapist, and we're gonna make you safe, you say, "No, he's my kid's baseball coach, and he should stay right where he is," right?
Right.
That makes a difference when we know our neighbors and we know
Yeah.
we can tell the truth, right? Um, I it's disappointing, of course, that we've let it get to this point and that the Jeffrey Epstein stuff so distracts people that they don't see all of this. But we also have to connect the dots for folks. The destruction of FEMA, which we're seeing the impact of in real time. There's still 100 people missing, and they can't figure out like to go hunt for them. I mean, Texans are doing what they can down there,
Right.
but FEMA is a mess. And
Right.
we are going to have, because we always do, right? Fires and floods and storms. And our government is going to fail because they're set up to fail now because
Right.
Christine Nome wants to have a fashion shoot in El Salvador and
Yeah.
does not care about,
Yeah.
right? So we need to connect it. We need to not have the story be the story of this tragedy in Texas. We need to say it's part of a pattern. There was this, then there was the one after it, and there's going to be another one because they do not care.
Right.
Not about you, not about me. They care about grift and making the money. And that's right. That's not,
Right.
yeah, that's corrupt. That's fascism. That is not the rule of law in a democracy.
And, I'm sure you remember back in 2006 with Katrina, and that was such a watershed moment for the George W. Bush administration because of the failures there. And it was just an unimaginable tragedy, but, he put like his college friend in charge who didn't know what he was doing. Heck of a job, Brownie. If you recall any of this, if you're older like Edwin and I, but it stood out because as much as we've always had this rhetoric from the right, government fails, government can't do anything. It stood out because it was such a massive failure. Because after previous hurricanes like Hurricane Andrew that swept through Florida back in the
Mhm.
George H.W. Bush administration, FEMA did its job. There are always going to be tragedies, especially with climate change. It's getting worse. But when you have competent people, you can save lives and make people's lives better. And that was a huge failure for George W. Bush. Now we are set up with the Trump administration to have Katrinas on the regular. I mean, we haven't even gotten into season yet. Who knows what's going to happen on the southeast, coast? Wildfires, we've had a gentler season than we have in the past, but August is coming. We know what's going to happen out west, in Colorado and California. This administration does not care. And it does not care if you live in a red state or a blue state, because this was in Texas. You can only imagine what they'll do in California. And so, you know, we talk a lot about the failures of government, but this is on a scale that we have never seen. And we can't allow our country to be ripped apart like this because this is not what the vast majority of us want. If there
No.
is a tragedy, we're there for each other. In your communities, if somebody's house burns down, we're here for each other. And that's what makes America great. Not
Yeah,
not not
absolutely
Trump
right.
and his red hat.
No, not in the least. I mean, Americans, right now, right? There's a fire in the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon Lodge on the North Rim burned down,
I
right?
know.
This is
Yeah.
climate change, but it's also incompetence. You understaff, you have no one there to like man the hoses. I mean, it is complete incompetence. Oh, but wait a minute. I can open up a dam and waste a bunch of water in Northern California because there's a fire in Los Angeles and
Where it
pretend the
doesn't.
beautiful water I solved the problem. The man is insane, Susan,
Right. Yeah,
and dangerous.
he's talking about raking the forest floor to prevent forest fires. I mean, just utterly insane
I'm happy
things.
to give them a rake and send them out, but get them out of Washington. And we have to do that. We have to get rid of this. There's no half measure. We are not safe with this um, fascist party in power. And it's not like they're pretending to work with anybody else. They are working for the benefit of their political party, not for the benefit of Americans. And that's not in our tradition.
No, it's not.
God,
I
Abe
like.
Lincoln would climb out of his grave and, I mean, ooh, he would be mad.
Yeah. I mean, with as hard as he fought to keep this union together, and for us to be fighting so many of the same battles now, over 150 years later, it's really sobering. But I think we
Well,
should.
one other just
Yeah,
happier thing. I tell this to young people all the time who are terrified. You are lucky to live in a time that's important. What you do matters. People live their whole lives in times that are lovely and they get to have good lives, but what they do doesn't matter. It's the history of the world. In World War II, we had a generation we call the greatest generation. What they did mattered,
it's a.
right? Right now, what people do matters. It will determine whether democracy stays alive in the world as a governing idea or disappears, right? And that is so important. And that's giving. I teach a class at a local university. It's giving people meaning and energy and focus. That's so important.
It's true. I mean, I think that we are going to see the next generation of really consequential leaders come out of this. And, for people who are willing to speak up and not try and appease Trump, um, w- those are the people who are going to be remembered. But, beyond, people like, the governor of your state, JB Pritzker or AOC, really, I think this is a good moment for us to not necessarily to not wait for our leaders. There are things that each and every one of us can do,
Every day.
and it's horrible to keep relearning that lesson and with the pain that is going on right now, but it's an important thing for all of us to remember. We still do have enormous power. We still do have rights in this country. And our country was founded by, a few people standing up for democracy, which, was a radical concept back then. And you know what? To a lot of people, it's a radical concept today, the people who are running our government. But it's up to us to give them a history lesson. And
Yep.
that's what we've got to do.
Yep. And a path to a future.
Absolutely. Because this country, our future is worth fighting for our kids, for our grandkids, for everybody else's. Edwin, can you just share with us the best way for people to get your newsletter, to listen to your show, to see you on
Sure.
social media?
Thank you. Yep, I have a radio show once a week called The Big Picture. It is on Heartland Signal. You can go on their website and listen to it live, or it's recorded. You can find it on Spotify. Um, and I write occasionally. That writing shows up in "It's the Democracy Stupid" on Substack. But Susan, you're kind enough to republish some of them, so they can find it like, at Lincoln Square. All good.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll do this again next week, and we'll see what this week brings because it's at this point it's hard to predict. But
Isn't it?
but thank you, Edwin, and
You
thank
bet.
you for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.